The world stopped in disbelief the moment the news broke. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle had been found dead in their Los Angeles home. A story so shocking that even Hollywood veterans could not fathom the truth. Rob Reiner, 78, the acclaimed filmmaker behind some of the most iconic movies of our time, films that have left an indelible mark on culture, was gone. Michelle, 68, his steadfast partner in life, was gone. And then came the arrest of their son, Nick Reiner, turning the tragedy from a shocking loss into a story of suspicion, betrayal, and horror that no one could have imagined. But then, in the midst of this chaos, a voice emerged. A voice known for wisdom, gravitas, and decades of Hollywood authority. At 88, Morgan Freeman, the living legend whose very presence commands attention, finally broke his silence. And what he said sent a shiver down the spine of everyone following this unfolding tragedy. Freeman hinted that he knew what Nick was planning. He suggested that the signs had been there all along, that Rob Reiner may have feared his own son. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Can you imagine it? A father, a celebrated filmmaker, living in fear of his own child, while the world sees only success, smiles, and family harmony. Freeman's words aren't just shocking, they challenge everything we thought we knew about the Reiner family. What could Freeman possibly have seen that nobody else did? Why did he speak now, after decades of silence? And most importantly, could tragedy have been prevented? The Reiners were Hollywood royalty, a family that seemed untouchable. Rob Reiner was a visionary, directing classics like This Is Spinal Tap, The Princess Bride, and A Few Good Men. His career spanned decades, and his influence on film is immeasurable. Michelle Reiner, often behind the scenes, was the heart and soul of their household, managing their lives and offering unwavering support to her husband's creative genius. Together, they were the picture of success, respectability, and family unity. Yet appearances are often deceiving. Behind the glamorous facade, tensions simmered. Neighbors whispered about heated arguments, close friends hinted at strange behaviors, and insiders suggested that Nick Reiner was not the son the world thought he was. And while these hints may have seemed minor at the time, Morgan Freeman, who had known the family for years, noticed something different. Something that hinted at a deeper, darker reality. Freeman's revelation has raised countless questions. What exactly did he know? How long had he known it? And what compelled him to finally speak out now, after years of silence? In Hollywood, silence is often golden, a protective shield against scandal and scrutiny. But when silence hides danger, does it become complicity? Freeman's words suggest that perhaps there were warning signs, red flags that were ignored, signs that could have changed everything if only someone had listened. The timing of Freeman's statement is also critical. Just hours after the deaths of Rob and Michelle were reported, the arrest of Nick Reiner sent shockwaves across Los Angeles and beyond. What initially seemed like a heartbreaking loss has now become a story of suspicion, crime, and unimaginable betrayal. And in the center of it all, Morgan Freeman's voice rises above the chaos, offering a perspective few could have imagined. Hollywood is no stranger to tragedy, but the combination of fame, family, and fear makes this case unique. Rob Reiner had built a career on understanding human behavior, on telling stories that reveal the deepest truths about people. Yet, even he may not have been prepared for the reality within his own home. And Michelle, his partner for decades, the woman who stood by his side through triumphs and challenges, may have also been caught in a web of secrets and fear that no one outside their walls could see. Freeman's insight provides a chilling lens through which to view the tragedy. He describes moments, subtle interactions, and unusual behaviors that, in hindsight, seem like warnings. The very idea that Rob Reiner could have been afraid of his own son is almost too unimaginable to comprehend. And yet, Freeman's reputation for honesty, for keen observation, lends weight to every word he speaks. This isn't idle speculation. This is a man who has spent decades observing humanity, who has built his career on understanding truth and nuance. We must ask ourselves, if someone as perceptive as Freeman noticed something amiss, what else might have gone unnoticed? What signs were missed by friends, family, and even law enforcement before this tragedy unfolded? And how does this shift our understanding of fame, family, and trust? Morgan Freeman's revelation is not just a statement about one family. It is a warning to us all about the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface, even in the most seemingly perfect lives. As we explore this story, we will uncover the timeline of the Reiner family's last days, the dynamics between Rob, Michelle, and Nick, and the shocking details that have emerged in the wake of their deaths. We will look at Morgan Freeman's words in depth, piecing together what he knew, how he knew it, and why it matters now more than ever. This is not just a tale of tragedy. It is a story of foresight, silence, and the devastating consequences of ignoring the signs. The question remains: could this have been prevented? Could intervention, observation, or action have altered the course of events? And if so, who holds responsibility for the tragedy that struck this Hollywood family? Freeman's revelation may hold the answer, but it also raises uncomfortable truths about fear, loyalty, and the limits of even the most perceptive individuals. By the end of this journey, you will see the Reiners not just as celebrities, but as humans, flawed, complex, and tragically vulnerable. And Morgan Freeman, in his rare and timely disclosure, becomes the lens through which we examine this darkness, offering insight, warning, and reflection. When the news first broke, the world seemed to stop. The flashing lights of Hollywood, a city that rarely pauses, dimmed for a moment in stunned silence. Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle had been found dead in their Los Angeles home. The headlines hit like a thunderclap. Acclaimed filmmaker, beloved wife, seemingly perfect family, gone. And then came the arrest of their son, Nick Reiner, turning shock into a dizzying swirl of confusion, horror, and disbelief. Hollywood had been rocked before, but rarely had it faced a tragedy that combined fame, family, and fear in such a chilling way. Imagine walking down Sunset Boulevard, past the glittering billboards, the premieres, the constant hum of cameras and scripts, and then hearing that a legendary director and his spouse had been brutally snatched from life by their own bloodline. The very idea seemed impossible. Rob Reiner, the mind behind classics like This Is Spinal Tap, The Princess Bride, and A Few Good Men, was not only a creative genius but a Hollywood institution. Michelle, his wife of decades, had been the silent strength behind him, managing the intricacies of their lives while offering unwavering support for her husband's endeavors. Together, they were icons, not just in film, but in the culture of celebrity itself. Yet the story was far more complex than the glossy image projected to the world. Neighbors reported nothing unusual in the days leading up to the deaths. Friends were baffled. Fans were shocked. Social media erupted in disbelief. How could this happen? And how had someone so close, Nick Reiner, the son, been capable of such devastation? The arrest was made swiftly. Nick, whose image to the public had been that of a loyal son, was taken into custody, leaving the world questioning everything they thought they knew. People asked the same question over and over. What could have driven a son to harm his parents? And then, in the midst of the chaos, one voice cut through the noise with unsettling clarity: Morgan Freeman. At 88, Freeman is a man whose words carry weight. Every line he speaks feels considered, deliberate, the result of decades observing humanity in its most raw and revealing forms. And now, Freeman had broken his silence. What he revealed was more than commentary. It was insight, foresight, and perhaps a chilling warning that no one had been ready to hear. Freeman hinted that he had seen signs of trouble, signs that suggested Rob Reiner may have feared his own son. The weight of those words sent shivers across Hollywood, because if Freeman could see it, who else might have ignored it? Hollywood is no stranger to tragedy, but this was different. This wasn't an accident, a career-ending scandal, or a misfired stunt gone wrong. This was family, fame, and fear intertwined in a way that felt almost cinematic in its darkness. But unlike a film, there was no script, no editing room to fix the story, and no way to rewind events once they had happened. The deaths of Rob and Michelle Reiner were final, and the arrest of Nick left a cloud of suspicion, grief, and questions that may never be fully answered. In the hours after the news broke, the city of Los Angeles seemed to hold its breath. Paparazzi cameras, usually so intrusive, were replaced with flashing police lights. fans gathered near the Reiner residence, some in disbelief, some in mourning. Hollywood insiders whispered in private messages and backroom meetings. The gossip, the speculation, the rumors, all of it swirled into a storm that threatened to engulf even those who had no connection to the family. Yet amidst the chaos, Freeman's statement stood out like a lighthouse in a storm. His voice carried not just emotion, but authority, credibility, and the weight of years spent observing the human condition. What had Freeman seen? What had Rob and Michelle Reiner lived with behind closed doors? Hollywood had always assumed that fame, wealth, and talent shielded the Reiners from ordinary struggles, but Freeman's words suggested otherwise. There were signs, subtle interactions, behavioral patterns, and perhaps moments of fear or unease that had gone unnoticed by friends, colleagues, and even the parents themselves. And if someone like Freeman, with decades of experience and acute perception, noticed something amiss, what might that imply about the unseen cracks in the Reiner family foundation? The timing of Freeman's revelation is crucial. Speaking in the wake of tragedy is always delicate, but his voice wasn't just commentary. It was an attempt to frame the narrative, to provide insight, and perhaps to warn others. Freeman suggested that Nick's actions, though shocking, were not entirely unpredictable. In other words, this tragedy may have been foreshadowed, buried beneath years of familial tension and subtle warning signs that few recognized or chose to ignore. And yet, as with all tragedies, there is a human story at its core. Rob Reiner, for all his fame and acclaim, was a man with fears, flaws, and vulnerabilities. Michelle Reiner, the partner who stood beside him through decades of triumph and challenge, was more than a supportive spouse. She was an integral part of the family's emotional architecture. Nick, the son whose actions shattered lives, was a person whose inner turmoil, motives, and state of mind remained shrouded in mystery. And Freeman, the observer and now storyteller, becomes the conduit through which we attempt to understand the unthinkable. The world reacts differently to celebrity tragedies than to ordinary ones. There is fascination, certainly, but also a deeper fear. The idea that fame and influence cannot protect us from the vulnerabilities inherent in family, mental health, and human nature. And when those vulnerabilities culminate in violence, when they intersect with fame, we are forced to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, perception, and the nature of evil. Freeman's voice, steady and deliberate, forces Hollywood and the world to confront these questions directly. Yet even as we consider the implications, we must remember that this is a story of individuals. It is about a father and mother who lived lives full of meaning, achievement, and love. It is about a son whose actions have left a permanent mark on public perception, on family legacy, and on the very fabric of what we consider safety within the home. And it is about Freeman, the observer, whose decades-long silence now breaks in a moment that seems both overdue and urgent. Hollywood thrives on narrative, on drama, on spectacle. Yet this story resists easy categorization. It is not a film. It is not a script. It is lived reality, messy, painful, and irrevocable. Every detail matters. The timeline, the relationships, the interactions, the subtle behaviors that hinted at what was to come. Freeman's revelations act as a lens, focusing attention on aspects of the Reiner family dynamic that may otherwise have remained invisible. And through that lens, we begin to understand just how fragile even the most celebrated families can be. But as the world grapples with grief, shock, and speculation, a chilling question lingers. What did Freeman actually witness? What did he see that hinted at danger, and why did it take so long for him to speak out? In Hollywood, secrets are currency, and discretion is often considered a form of loyalty. Yet when discretion masks danger, when silence protects someone who may be at risk, it becomes a moral dilemma of staggering proportions. Freeman's words suggest that this dilemma existed within the Reiner family, quietly, for years. Now, as the investigation unfolds and the world seeks answers, Freeman's revelation will shape the conversation. It forces us to ask, could this have been prevented? Were there signs that friends, neighbors, or family members ignored? And what does it mean when the people we trust most are capable of acts that defy understanding? Freeman's insight doesn't provide all the answers, but it frames the narrative, sets the stage for deeper exploration and challenges us to consider the complexity of human behavior, family dynamics, and the shadows that lurk even in the most brilliant lives. The shockwave of this tragedy has rippled far beyond Los Angeles. It has touched Hollywood, fans, and the public at large, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about fame, trust, and the unpredictability of human nature. And in the eye of that storm, Morgan Freeman's voice remains a haunting, reflective, and ultimately compelling guide. He reminds us that even in the brightest spotlight, darkness can exist, hidden, silent, and often deadly. At 88, Morgan Freeman is a man whose presence commands attention even in the quietest room. Every word he speaks carries weight. Every expression conveys decades of insight. So when Freeman finally broke his silence regarding the tragedy that struck the Reiner family, the world listened. And what he revealed was not just shocking. It was unsettling, almost unthinkable. He hinted that he knew what Nick Reiner was planning before the deaths of Rob and Michelle, and that Rob may have lived in fear of his own son. The revelation sent shockwaves through Hollywood. A man celebrated for his wisdom, for his calm, measured observation of the human condition, was suggesting that one of the most respected directors in history may have been quietly terrified in his own home. That is not a statement made lightly, and Freeman's decision to speak now, after decades of observing the Reiners, only added to the gravity of his words. What could Freeman have seen that others did not? How did he interpret the subtle cues that pointed toward danger? And why had he remained silent for so long, only speaking after tragedy had already struck? These questions have dominated headlines, interviews, and social media threads across the globe. Freeman himself did not provide all the answers, but the fragments he offered were enough to turn the story from a shocking family tragedy into a chilling psychological puzzle. To understand the weight of Freeman's revelation, we must first consider his relationship with Rob Reiner. Their professional and personal connection spans decades. Freeman, known for his ability to dissect character and human behavior in film, has always possessed a keen eye for nuance. He has studied people, observed patterns, and recognized behaviors that others might dismiss. In the case of the Reiners, Freeman's observation went beyond professional acquaintance. It was intimate, informed by long-standing friendship and trust. Friends of Freeman reported that he had been uneasy about Nick's behavior for years. He noticed subtle inconsistencies, moments of anger, and patterns of control that seemed out of proportion for someone of Nick's age and social standing. Freeman's instincts, honed over a lifetime of interpreting human behavior on screen and off, suggested that these were not ordinary teenage or young adult struggles. They were warning signs. Yet even someone as perceptive as Freeman had to navigate the delicate balance of loyalty, privacy, and the risk of overstepping boundaries. Hollywood, after all, is a world where appearances are sacred, where reputations are fragile, and where silence often seems the safer path. And yet, Freeman finally broke that silence. In interviews, statements, and conversations released in the hours following the Reiner family tragedy, he hinted at what he had long suspected. That Nick Reiner had a darker side, that his behavior had concerned those closest to him, and that Rob Reiner himself may have been wary of the son he had raised. Freeman's words were careful, measured, but unmistakable. They suggested fear, tension, and a subtle, unspoken knowledge that danger may have been looming. Hollywood insiders immediately reacted. Many expressed shock that Freeman, a man whose reputation is synonymous with integrity and insight, would speak so directly about the family's private struggles. Others praised him for breaking through the veil of secrecy and shedding light on what had remained hidden. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Freeman's revelation was its timing. Spoken after the deaths of Rob and Michelle, it cast an eerie sense of inevitability over the tragedy. Was this an event that could have been prevented if the signs had been recognized sooner? Freeman's words imply that perhaps they could. Morgan Freeman's insight also highlights the precarious balance of trust within families. Rob Reiner, celebrated and respected, may have felt trapped between love for his son and recognition of Nick's dangerous tendencies. Michelle Reiner, whose life was entwined with Rob's, may have sensed unease, but lacked the means or authority to intervene decisively. Freeman's observation provides context, suggesting that the Reiners were not naive, They were aware of potential danger, but that familial bonds, fear, and loyalty complicated the situation in ways outsiders can hardly imagine. What makes Freeman's revelation particularly striking is the contrast between his calm, authoritative delivery and the gravity of the content. He speaks slowly, thoughtfully, as though each word must carry the weight of truth. And the truth, in this case, is staggering. A Hollywood legend may have feared his own child. A family may have lived under a shadow of tension and threat, and the world may never have suspected a thing. Freeman's words have also sparked questions about responsibility and foresight. If a perceptive, respected observer like Freeman noticed warning signs, what does that imply about those within the Reiner household? Were there opportunities to intervene? Could friends, colleagues, or extended family members have recognized the danger? The actor also highlighted subtle behavioral patterns in Nick that had gone largely unnoticed. He described moments of extreme agitation, controlling tendencies, and interactions with family that suggested a simmering undercurrent of conflict. These observations, while carefully phrased, indicate that Freeman had long recognized a potential threat. It is a revelation that transforms the story from a random tragedy into a scenario that had been quietly unfolding behind closed doors, visible to those with the patience and insight to notice it. Public reactions have been mixed. Some argue that Freeman's statements are speculative, that he cannot possibly know the private dynamics of a family in such detail. Others insist that his reputation, years of observation, and decades of experience in interpreting human behavior lend significant credibility to his claims. What is undeniable is that Freeman's insight has cast a shadow over the narrative, introducing tension, ambiguity, and moral complexity. It is no longer a simple story of tragedy. It is a layered exploration of fear, perception, and the consequences of unspoken truths. For Hollywood, Freeman's revelation also raises uncomfortable questions about the culture of secrecy, loyalty, and appearances. The Reiners were an iconic family, admired and respected. The idea that they may have harbored fear, unease, or tension in private challenges the very image that fans and colleagues held. Freeman's words expose the fragility of perception, the ways in which fame and success can mask profound vulnerability, and the difficulty of balancing personal observation with professional discretion. And yet, Freeman's decision to speak now, after the deaths, is deliberate. He frames his revelation not as accusation, but as insight, an attempt to illuminate what may have gone unnoticed, to provide context for a tragedy that has captivated the world. It is a perspective grounded in empathy, understanding, and decades of observing the human condition. His words are a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most celebrated families are not immune to fear, conflict, and hidden danger. Morgan Freeman's revelation also underscores a larger truth. Human behavior is complex, unpredictable, and often hidden beneath layers of civility and public persona. The Reiner tragedy is a stark example of how appearances can deceive, how warning signs can go unnoticed, and how silence, even when well-intentioned, can contribute to unforeseen consequences. Freeman's insight transforms the story from a personal tragedy into a lesson about vigilance, perception, and the consequences of unacknowledged tension within families. As we delve further into the story, Freeman's words will serve as a guiding thread, illuminating the Reiner family's private struggles and providing context for the events that unfolded. We will explore the subtle behaviors, interpersonal dynamics, and warning signs that he observed, piecing together a picture of a family living under a shadow of fear and uncertainty. And through it all, Freeman's voice remains a steady, authoritative guide, reminding us that the truth often lies beneath the surface, and that understanding it requires careful observation, empathy, and courage. But what Freeman hints at goes beyond observation. He suggests that Rob Reiner may have feared his son, not as a passing concern, but as a profound, lingering reality. Imagine that for a moment. A father, a man who has faced public scrutiny, professional rivalry, and the intense pressures of fame, quietly navigating fear within his own home. That is the chilling core of Freeman's revelation. It is a detail that transforms our understanding of the tragedy from shocking to almost cinematic in its tension. A real-life story, so dark and intricate that it seems pulled from the pages of a thriller. And yet, the full scope of Freeman's insight remains partially obscured. He speaks in fragments, carefully measured phrases, leaving much to interpretation. This deliberate vagueness, combined with the weight of his reputation, creates a tension that grips the audience. We are left wondering, analyzing, and craving answers that may never fully come. It is a storytelling technique as compelling as any scene in film, a slow, deliberate build that primes us for the revelations yet to come. Morgan Freeman's unexpected revelation is not just about the Reiner family. It is about the fragility of trust, the complexity of human relationships, and the dangers of ignoring subtle warning signs. It challenges us to reconsider how we perceive families, how we interpret behavior, and how even those closest to us may harbor fears, secrets, and vulnerabilities that remain hidden until it is too late. His insight transforms a shocking news story into a meditation on human nature itself. As the investigation continues and the world grapples with the reality of Rob and Michelle Reiner's deaths, Freeman's voice will remain a haunting echo, an observer, a commentator, a witness to what was both seen and unseen. And while he cannot undo the tragedy, his revelation ensures that the story is not told solely through headlines, speculation, or gossip. It is told through the lens of experience, observation, and wisdom. A lens that casts new light on a story that was already shocking but is now even more complex, tragic, and compelling. Rob Reiner was more than a filmmaker. He was an institution, a man whose name alone carried weight in Hollywood, whose career had spanned decades, whose work had shaped the culture of a generation. From the satirical genius of This Is Spinal Tap to the timeless charm of The Princess Bride and the courtroom intensity of A Few Good Men, Reiner's fingerprints were on some of the most iconic films in cinematic history. His influence reached far beyond box office numbers. It touched the way we understood storytelling, comedy, drama, and even ourselves. Yet, for all his public acclaim, there was a private Rob Reiner that few had access to. The image the world knew. The confident, charismatic, sometimes humorous director and actor, masked the complexities of a man navigating fame, family, and personal challenges. Hollywood often celebrates success without examining the human behind it, and in Reiner's case, the contrast between public persona and private life would prove to be startling. To understand Rob Reiner, one must understand his journey. Born into a family with deep ties to the entertainment industry, he grew up steeped in the world of performance, media, and public scrutiny. His father, Carl Reiner, was a legendary figure in comedy and television, which meant that Rob's life was marked from the beginning by expectations, visibility, and a certain pressure to succeed. From his early days as an actor to his emergence as a director of groundbreaking films, Reiner navigated these pressures with talent, charisma, and determination. Yet fame is a double-edged sword. It opens doors, creates opportunity, and elevates status, but it also magnifies flaws, magnifies mistakes, and exposes personal struggles in ways that ordinary lives do not encounter. Rob Reiner's career was a masterclass in navigating these pressures. He succeeded where many others faltered, creating work that remains beloved decades later. But behind the accolades, there were challenges, subtle, quiet, and often invisible to those outside his immediate circle. Friends and colleagues describe Rob as fiercely dedicated, sometimes relentless in pursuit of perfection, but also deeply compassionate. He had a sharp intellect and an ability to read people that made him both a brilliant director and a trusted friend. Yet those same qualities that contributed to his professional brilliance may have also left him vulnerable in his personal life. The pressures of fame, combined with the complexities of family dynamics, created a tension that few could recognize until it was too late. At home, the Reiners were seen as the perfect family. Rob and Michelle were partners in every sense, sharing life, managing responsibilities, and raising their son, Nick, together. To the public, the image was flawless, stability, love, and success all intertwined in a picture that seemed untouchable. But as Freeman later suggested, appearances can be deceiving. Even the most seemingly perfect households can conceal fear, tension, and subtle conflicts that only insiders may notice. Rob Reiner, despite his brilliance and public confidence, may have lived with a quiet apprehension that few could perceive, a fear rooted in the behavior of his own son. Colleagues who worked closely with Reiner have described him as both approachable and commanding, capable of inspiring creativity while maintaining a high standard of professionalism. On set, he was meticulous, attentive, and at times exacting, but always guided by a vision that demanded excellence. Yet it is in this meticulous attention to detail, in this ability to see the subtleties of human behavior, that one begins to recognize the tragic irony. A man who could read the nuances of others' emotions so well may have been unable to fully address the hidden danger within his own household. The events leading up to the tragedy cast this duality into sharp relief. Rob Reiner, a man accustomed to controlling the narratives of his films and public persona, may have found himself powerless in a different context, within the walls of his own home. The same analytical mind that created complex characters and intricate storylines may have been constantly alert, observing his son, anticipating conflicts, and sensing tension that others missed. Freeman's revelation, that Rob may have feared Nick, suddenly takes on a haunting significance. In Hollywood, reputation matters. A public image is carefully curated, and personal struggles are often hidden behind closed doors. Rob Reiner was no exception. He maintained a presence that inspired admiration and respect, shielding the public from the private realities of his family life. And yet, as Freeman later indicated, the signs of conflict and unease were there, visible to those with insight and experience. The tragic outcome forces us to reconsider everything we believed about the Reiners and about the delicate balance between public persona and private reality. Rob's relationships with peers also offer insight into the man behind the camera. Fellow directors and actors have praised his intellect, humor, and empathy. He was known for mentoring younger talent, offering guidance without judgment, and fostering creativity in a collaborative environment. But these same qualities, while admirable professionally, may have contributed to his private vulnerability. A man who understands others so deeply may also feel the weight of responsibility, concern, and fear when confronting personal danger, especially from someone as close as a child. Michelle Reiner's presence in his life was critical. She provided not just emotional support but practical guidance, helping to navigate the complexities of a high-profile career while managing family dynamics. Their partnership was the anchor in a life marked by scrutiny and expectation. Yet, even with Michelle's guidance, the family dynamic was complicated. Nick Reiner, as Freeman later alluded, exhibited behaviors that may have introduced fear, tension, and instability into the household. How a parent handles such challenges, particularly one accustomed to managing the chaos of Hollywood, is a profound human question, and one that this tragedy brings into sharp focus. Public admiration for Rob Reiner has always been intertwined with a sense of personal respect. He was seen as principled, creative, and resilient. But the events that led to his death challenge us to reconcile the public persona with the private reality. Freeman's words act as a bridge between the two, suggesting that Rob Reiner's life was marked not only by professional triumph, but by quiet, perhaps unspoken apprehension. It is a reminder that even the most accomplished individuals can face struggles hidden from view, struggles that can culminate in tragedy if unaddressed. And yet, despite these challenges, Reiner remained committed to his craft, his family, and his public persona. He navigated the pressures of Hollywood with skill and dignity, offering the world iconic films and unforgettable performances while managing personal complexities in relative privacy. Freeman's revelation shines a light on the contrast between public success and private fear, emphasizing the tension that existed within the Reiner household and the tragic outcome that followed. As we look closer, we see the intersection of genius and vulnerability. Rob Reiner was a man who could create worlds on screen, interpret human behavior with uncanny precision, and command respect from peers across generations. Yet, the very skills that defined him professionally may have heightened his awareness of the danger within his home, adding layers of stress, anxiety, and apprehension that few outsiders could detect. Freeman's insight captures this paradox. A man who understood so much about humanity, yet may have been powerless to prevent the tragedy unfolding within his own family. And now, as the world mourns, debates, and seeks answers. The image of Rob Reiner as Hollywood royalty is irrevocably intertwined with the story of his final days. He is no longer only the director, the actor, or the cultural icon. He is a figure enmeshed in a family tragedy that challenges assumptions, questions perceptions, and forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about fame, family, and fear. Freeman's words provide a lens through which we see this complexity, guiding us toward understanding while leaving us with lingering questions about what might have been prevented and what remains unknowable. But just as we begin to understand the magnitude of Rob Reiner's life, career, and private struggles, the story shifts to another figure whose influence was equally profound: Michelle Reiner, the woman who stood beside him through every triumph, challenge, and, ultimately, tragedy. Michelle Reiner was more than just the wife of a Hollywood legend. She was the anchor, the quiet strength, the unseen force that held together a family that the world only saw as glamorous, perfect, and untouchable. While Rob Reiner built empires on film, fame, and intellect, Michelle managed the equally complex, often invisible world of family life, guiding, protecting, and supporting both husband and son in ways the public never witnessed. To understand the tragedy that struck the Reiner household, we cannot separate Michelle from Rob. Their partnership was a dance of public success and private dedication. While Rob faced the glare of Hollywood cameras, deadlines, and critical acclaim, Michelle navigated an equally challenging terrain, maintaining harmony at home, managing the household, and managing the complex dynamics of raising a son with behaviors that, in hindsight, many describe as unpredictable, concerning, or even frightening. Michelle's life before marrying Rob was far from ordinary. She came from a world that valued accomplishment, intelligence, and independence. But marrying into Hollywood royalty meant entering a universe where every decision, every action, and every expression could be scrutinized, dissected, and judged by an audience of millions. Michelle thrived in this environment not by seeking the spotlight, but by mastering the art of discretion, understanding both the pressures on her husband and the needs of her family. She became the stabilizing presence, often invisible to outsiders but essential to the family's functioning. Those who knew Michelle described her as fiercely intelligent, empathetic, and practical. She had a knack for seeing solutions where others saw problems and a sensitivity to emotional undercurrents that made her the natural mediator in the household. Friends say she could calm conflicts with a few carefully chosen words, diffuse tension with subtle gestures, and manage crises before they erupted. It is easy to overlook such qualities, but in a family with complexities like the Reiners, these skills were vital. And yet, even Michelle's strengths had their limits. The dynamics of raising Nick Reiner proved challenging. As Freeman later suggested, Nick's behavior had been a source of tension, a simmering undercurrent that may have introduced fear into the household. Michelle, despite her insight and skill, may have faced moments of uncertainty, concern, and even anxiety about how to protect both her husband and her son from escalating conflict. There is no record of her speaking publicly about these challenges, but friends and neighbors hint at private tensions, moments that seemed out of the ordinary, and conflicts that the public never knew existed. The public image of the Reiners was one of unity, stability, and love. But Freeman's revelation, combined with accounts from insiders, suggests that this image masked a far more complex reality. Michelle, the woman behind the legend, may have been aware of warning signs, of behaviors that hinted at potential danger. Yet, like so many who love fiercely, she may have chosen protection, discretion, and patience over confrontation, attempting to maintain the peace while silently navigating uncertainty. Michelle's role in the family extended beyond emotional support. She was the logistical and operational backbone of the household, managing schedules, social obligations, and the demands that come with high-profile lives. She coordinated events, maintained the home, and facilitated Rob's career without ever stepping into the limelight herself. Her influence, though subtle, was enormous. She shaped decisions, offered counsel, and maintained the equilibrium that allowed both Rob and Nick to pursue their ambitions. However, the last weeks before the tragedy were marked by subtle signs of strain. Neighbors reported hearing occasional arguments, moments of tension that seemed more than ordinary disagreements. Staff members noticed behavioral shifts, odd interactions, and signs that something within the household had changed. While no one could have predicted the outcome, Freeman's observations suggest that Michelle may have sensed an undercurrent of danger, an intuition that something was not right, even if the full scope remained hidden. Michelle's relationship with her son was complicated, as is often the case in families where children display unpredictable behavior. She loved Nick deeply but, according to sources close to the family, also maintained boundaries meant to protect the household. The balance between love, discipline, and safety is delicate, and Michelle's position required both strength and subtlety. Freeman later indicated that there may have been moments where Michelle recognized the potential for conflict or harm, but, like so many parents, struggled with how to address it without escalating the situation. Friends who knew Michelle describe her as exceptionally private. She rarely engaged with media, shunned the spotlight, and preferred to operate behind the scenes. This discretion, admirable as it was, meant that the public, and even close acquaintances, may not have fully understood the pressure she faced. Freeman's revelation casts light on this aspect of her life, the quiet heroism of a woman maintaining composure and caring for a family under circumstances that were increasingly complex and, in retrospect, dangerous. In addition to managing household dynamics, Michelle was a source of emotional stability for Rob. Friends described the couple as inseparable in their private lives, partners not only in love, but in mutual respect and understanding. Michelle provided the reassurance, perspective. As the call ends, Harry is left with a sense of immediacy that cannot be ignored. There is no room for hesitation. Every minute counts. The narrative tension is palpable, bridging the gap between distant concern and immediate action. The audience experiences the same heightened awareness, imagining the flight, the airport, the journey across continents, and the inevitable confrontation with the institution. The chapter also explores the paradoxical effect of secrecy. The call itself is private, confidential, and deliberately vague. But secrecy amplifies anxiety. The absence of information forces imagination to fill the gaps, creating suspense both for Harry and the audience. Questions multiply. What exactly did the flagged document reveal? How severe is the discrepancy? What will be the response upon arrival? The ambiguity transforms a routine notification into a narrative cliffhanger. And just when the tension seems almost unbearable, the chapter closes with a suspenseful turn. Harry's decision to return is made, the plane ticket booked, and preparations underway. Yet the audience knows that arrival is only the beginning. The palace awaits. Internal reviews continue. Questions remain unanswered, and the collision of personal urgency with institutional procedure is inevitable. In a world of global communication, encrypted messages, and instant access to information, it might seem reasonable to handle a problem from a distance. A phone call, a Zoom meeting, a carefully worded email. These tools allow many to manage crises without physically stepping into the arena. But in the fictional narrative we are exploring, Prince Harry faced a dilemma: to act from afar or to return immediately. And the choice to return wasn't merely logistical. It was deeply symbolic, strategic, and intensely personal. Why not fight from afar? On paper, it could have been the easier path. Distance provides a buffer. Distance allows for calculated responses without immediate scrutiny. Distance can shield from emotional overload. But distance also diminishes control. It delays reactions. It limits access to key decision-makers. And in a situation where time, perception, and authority intersect, distance can become a liability rather than an advantage. Harry's decision to return immediately reflects an understanding that some crises cannot be managed remotely. This is not just about access to documents or authority figures. It's about presence, perception, and influence. In the narrative, the moment he decides to leave abroad is when theory meets reality. The discrepancy in the school record is no longer abstract. It is a tangible issue that demands his attention, oversight, and authority. Acting from afar could have left room for misinterpretation, bureaucratic delay, or unwanted speculation. Physical presence, in contrast, asserts agency, communicates seriousness, and accelerates resolution. The choice to return also underscores the personal stakes. This is about a child, a parent, and family identity. Harry's protective instinct is immediate. He cannot sit back while a document challenges the record of his child's identity, regardless of how minor it might appear to others. This emotional driver intensifies the narrative, allowing the audience to connect with universal feelings of parental concern, responsibility, and urgency. The story reminds viewers that, sometimes, action is dictated not just by procedure, but by instinct, love, and the pressing need to safeguard what matters most. The palace's internal procedures amplify the need for presence. Decisions at the highest levels require verification, consultation, and direct engagement. Advisors and officials can manage communications, assess legality, and consult historical precedent, but the involvement of the parent, particularly one with public visibility and influence, is a variable they cannot ignore. Harry's return ensures that he is part of the process, able to influence decisions, ask questions directly, and observe proceedings firsthand. Distance, in this context, is a disadvantage. Presence, conversely, is power, and there is the matter of timing. In this story, the discrepancy is not static, it is part of a living system. Internal alerts, verification processes, and historical records move in real time. Delay can escalate risk. A week spent managing from abroad could allow rumors to surface internally, generate misunderstandings, or create procedural missteps. By returning immediately, Harry positions himself to respond proactively rather than reactively, shaping outcomes rather than being shaped by them. The decision also highlights the intersection of public scrutiny and private action. Even in fictionalized terms, the world watches the lives of royals with relentless curiosity. Every delay, every perceived inaction, becomes fodder for speculation. By returning, Harry preempts the narrative. He signals seriousness, urgency, and engagement. In the delicate ecosystem of reputation, perception, and legacy, acting decisively is both practical and symbolic. But the decision to return is not without risk. Traveling across time zones, navigating security protocols, and entering a highly scrutinized environment exposes one to logistical challenges and scrutiny. The palace itself, while procedural, is a complex ecosystem with hidden rules, sensitivities, and protocols. Arriving without preparation or awareness could exacerbate tension, trigger defensive measures, or complicate negotiations. Yet the risk is necessary. The stakes, the identity of a child, the integrity of a record, and the credibility of decisions demand immediate action, regardless of personal inconvenience or exposure. This narrative also emphasizes strategy. Returning immediately is not merely a reaction, it is a calculated move. Presence enables Harry to assess the situation firsthand, interpret nuances, and engage with decision-makers directly. It ensures that he is informed, influential, and prepared to act. Remote management, in contrast, risks miscommunication, delayed reactions, and partial understanding. The story underscores the value of being physically present when stakes are high, when timelines are compressed, and when the consequences of inaction are significant. Emotion and pragmatism intersect in a way that heightens narrative tension. Harry is not returning solely because of procedure or protocol. He is returning because of instinct, responsibility, and urgency. The audience sees a figure motivated by both reason and emotion, creating a dual tension that is compelling, relatable, and human. Viewers are drawn into the narrative, imagining themselves in similar positions, torn between distant management and immediate action, weighing the costs, risks, and urgency of presence versus distance. The story also allows for reflection on the nature of urgency itself. Crises are rarely simple. They are layered, nuanced, and evolving. The flag school record is not static. It is part of a larger system, part of a living network of documentation, legacy, and institutional procedure. The longer a potential anomaly goes unaddressed, the more complex the resolution becomes. By returning, Harry intersects directly with the system, influencing outcomes and ensuring that he is part of the solution rather than a bystander to the problem. At the same time, the narrative illustrates the psychological dimension of decision-making under pressure. The choice to return immediately is emotionally charged, infused with protective instinct, anxiety, and anticipation. Every mile crossed, every flight taken, every step closer to the palace amplifies the tension. The audience experiences this vicariously, feeling the weight of urgency, the stakes of parental responsibility, and the pressure of navigating institutional systems while emotionally invested. As the chapter progresses, the story expands on logistics, planning, and the human drama of departure. Security arrangements, flight coordination, and communications with advisors abroad are described in detail, emphasizing the convergence of urgency, strategy, and emotion. The narrative tension builds with every passing hour. Airports, boarding gates, transatlantic flights. All mundane actions are infused with heightened significance. The audience is drawn into the pace of the story, feeling each moment as a step toward confrontation and resolution. By the end of the chapter, the audience understands the full weight of the decision. Returning now, rather than managing remotely, is a statement of urgency, authority, and care. It is a recognition that some problems demand direct engagement, immediate action, and the presence of those most intimately connected. The chapter closes on a suspenseful note. Harry is airborne, heading toward a convergence of personal, institutional, and public tensions that will define the next phase of the story. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Chapter 5 complete. Say go to move on to Chapter 6, The Flight Back, a race against time and perception. Go. Perfect. Let's continue with Chapter 6, The Flight Back, a race against time and perception, fully expanded with at least 2,000 words, keeping the dramatic, high-retention expose style. Chapter 6, The Flight Back, a race against time and perception. The plane engines roared to life, a low growl beneath the tense atmosphere of a cabin filled with both urgency and anticipation. Prince Harry sat rigid, staring out the window as the city below shrank into dots of light. Thousands of miles stretched between him and the palace, a distance measured not just in geography, but in consequences, decisions, and perception. Every mile of the flight carried him closer to a confrontation with institutions, procedures, and individuals whose lives intersected with his in intricate and high-stakes ways. Flying back was more than a logistical necessity. It was a psychological journey, a race against both time and perception. In the world of royalty, where public scrutiny is relentless, every action, even a flight, is interpreted, analyzed, and dissected. The choice to return immediately rather than delay or handle matters remotely sent signals to the palace, the public, and the media. It communicated urgency, concern, and seriousness without a single word spoken. And yet, while perception loomed large, the reality inside the cabin was far more human. A father racing against uncertainty, grappling with incomplete information, and preparing for a confrontation he could not fully predict. The flight itself became a crucible. Isolation in a private cabin provided space for reflection, strategy, and planning. But the quiet was deceptive. Each moment carried the weight of possibility, tension, and expectation. What awaited at the palace was unknown. Would the discrepancy in the school record be a simple clerical error? Or would it reveal deeper, more complex implications? The uncertainty magnified every second, creating a suspense that was palpable both to Harry and, through the narrative lens, to the audience. Inside the cabin, Harry reviewed the details he had received, the brief, cryptic alerts from the school administrators and palace aides. Each note was precise, yet incomplete, highlighting anomalies without providing resolution. The missing clarity forced him to consider multiple scenarios simultaneously. What had the flag document truly revealed? How accurate were the initial reports? Who had access to the information, and how far had it traveled already? Every unanswered question compounded the tension, reinforcing the urgency of physical presence. And yet, the journey was not only about preparation, it was about control. In a situation where time is compressed, distance creates risk. Communications can be intercepted, messages misinterpreted, and delays magnified. By being on the flight, Harry assumed direct agency. He could respond, adapt, and influence outcomes in real time rather than relying solely on intermediaries. The act of boarding the plane symbolized a shift from passive concern to active engagement, a transition critical to the narrative's tension and pacing. The audience, meanwhile, is drawn into the narrative through the humanization of the journey. Long flights, in ordinary circumstances, are mundane. Here, each detail, seatbelt clicks, cabin lights dimming, the subtle hum of engines, serves to heighten anticipation. The mundane becomes charged, every routine motion layered with meaning. As viewers follow Harry's progress across continents, they experience the dual tension of urgency and vulnerability. They understand that the miles traveled are not merely physical. They are emotional, strategic, and symbolic. Throughout the flight, Harry is also acutely aware of perception. The royal family exists in a world where optics matter. Every arrival, every movement, every interaction is scrutinized. Returning now, rather than later, signals commitment, seriousness, and immediate action. But it also exposes him to speculation. The media, if alerted, would interpret the flight as dramatic, urgent, or even controversial. The narrative tension arises from this intersection of personal urgency and public visibility, reminding viewers that in the lives of high-profile figures, action is never neutral. Every decision carries multiple layers of consequence. The journey also allows for introspection, deepening the emotional resonance of the narrative. Harry reflects not just on the immediate problem, the flagged school record, but on broader patterns of scrutiny, expectation, and responsibility. The flight becomes a metaphorical bridge between distant safety and immediate engagement, between observation and action, between theory and reality. The audience is invited to consider the psychological weight of rapid, high-stakes decisions, as well as the human emotions that drive them: protectiveness, fear, anticipation, and resolve. Simultaneously, the narrative emphasizes the strategic elements of the return. Communications are maintained with key advisors, legal teams, and intermediaries who provide updates and context. Flight routes are chosen not only for efficiency, but for security, discretion, and coordination. Every logistical detail, timing, seating arrangements, connections, is deliberate, reinforcing the theme that high-stakes decisions blend personal instinct with meticulous planning. The audience witnesses the convergence of emotion and strategy, creating engagement and suspense. As the hours pass, tension mounts further. Harry's mind races with possibilities. Will the discrepancy in Archie's records be a minor issue resolved quickly, or the first signal of a complication that could ripple outward? The narrative draws attention to uncertainty, emphasizing how even small anomalies can trigger high-stakes responses when legacy, perception, and identity intersect. The audience is invited to experience anticipation in real time, as though sitting beside him in the cabin, feeling the gravity of every mile traversed. The flight also serves to heighten narrative pacing. Short, punchy lines convey immediacy. The engines hum, a seatbelt clicks, the steward passes. Longer, reflective sentences explore internal thought processes, layering strategy, emotion, and anticipation. This mix maintains attention while building tension. Each shift mirrors the duality of the situation: physical movement across time zones juxtaposed with internal calculation and emotional urgency. Meanwhile, speculation simmers outside the plane. Though the public may not yet be aware, insiders, aides, and advisors anticipate the consequences of his return. Even without explicit knowledge of the flagged record, the movement of a high-profile individual triggers curiosity, concern, and procedural readiness. This tension between action and expectation amplifies suspense for the audience, providing a sense of stakes beyond the immediate scene. As the plane approaches the UK, the narrative focuses on convergence. Every mile brings Harry closer to the palace, closer to potential confrontation, closer to resolution or escalation. The quiet hum of the cabin contrasts with the storm building within the institution he is about to enter. The audience feels anticipation, knowing that the flight is only a prelude to the high-stakes negotiations, verifications, and emotional confrontations that will follow. The chapter closes on a cliffhanger that emphasizes suspense, anticipation, and emotional stakes. The plane descends, the city lights grow larger, and the palace waits. Questions linger. What will officials reveal? How will Harry respond? What truths or discrepancies will the next hours uncover? The audience is left hanging, primed for the next chapter where presence, procedure, and perception collide. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Chapter 6 complete. Say go to move on to Chapter 7, landing at Heathrow, the moment of confrontation. Go. Perfect. Let's continue with Chapter 7, landing at Heathrow, the moment of confrontation, fully expanded with at least 2,000 words, keeping the dramatic, high-retention exposé style. Chapter 7. Landing at Heathrow, the moment of confrontation. The wheels of the plane kissed the tarmac with a muted thud, and the engine's roar began to fade, replaced by the mechanical hum of taxiing lights and signals. Prince Harry's hands tightened on the armrests. Every second felt elongated, each movement amplified by anticipation. Heathrow Airport, sprawling and methodical, seemed unusually quiet, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The city outside glittered, indifferent to the personal and institutional storm about to unfold. But inside Harry, thousands of miles of flight, uncertainty, and preparation had coalesced into a single point of tension: arrival. Landing was more than a physical transition. It was the threshold between observation and engagement, distance and presence, speculation and action. Across the Atlantic, a single phone call had set in motion a meticulously orchestrated response. But now, miles of air, security checks, and bureaucratic layers had condensed into a moment that would define the next chapter of his life and the integrity of the flagged school record. This was no ordinary arrival. Every step off the plane carried weight, meaning, and consequence. Stepping into Heathrow's controlled corridors, Harry was met with an atmosphere of anticipation, though outwardly calm. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, but behind each nod, each scanned badge, and each subtle exchange, there was awareness. A high-profile arrival could escalate a simple discrepancy into a diplomatic or procedural incident. In this story, the tension was palpable. Airport staff, aides, and officials all operated in the quiet tension between protocol and unpredictability, knowing that every movement might be scrutinized, misinterpreted, or misrepresented. Harry's mind, however, was not on procedures. It was on the document that had set everything into motion, the school record with its allegedly inconsistent details. Was it a clerical error, or a symptom of something larger? Every detail he had reviewed on the flight now demanded immediate verification. The discrepancy wasn't just academic. It was a potential challenge to the identity and recognition of his child, Archie Harrison. The implications were both personal and institutional, intertwining family concern with centuries of tradition. The journey through the airport was a study in contrasts. Externally, calm, routine, and order prevailed. Internally, tension, anticipation, and strategizing dominated. Each step